pretend to be Adam. I'll be Dave.
No. Good? All right. All right, what's going on? BSides Cleveland.
Are you intentionally lowering your voice?
No, I'm not. Would you shut your So if you're here to talk about Unix, the other white meat, and some privilege escalation. So welcome. My name is David Boyd. My co-presenter today is Adam Compton, and I'm going to let him talk about himself.
Click it. Click it. The other direction. There you go. Give me that. I'm going to stand in front of you now. There. No, my name is Adam Compton. I've been in information security, pen testing, coding, research, all that for way too many years now. But yeah, basic information, father, son, brother, programmer, pen tester, hillbilly, Eastern Kentucky, woo. But yeah, not much about me in there. I've been doing conferences for a while, presenting. I've been doing research. I got my start in Unix many moons ago. So that's one reason I was interested in doing a presentation on Unix. And that's enough about me. Let's move on. There, David.
All right. So as I said, I'm David Boyd. I'm a pen tester for Tech. I'm a Christian, which just means that I am a bad guy saved by grace. I'm a husband, father. I spent some time in the U.S. Army. I'm a huge geek and a big gamer. And I've been doing this for far too long as it is as well. That's also the little hacker. He's up and coming as well. So, hopefully he'll be coming around here pretty soon. Our agenda for today, we're going to be talking about Unix, not Windows. We're going to show some common exploit vectors as well as some privilege escalation techniques. Unfortunately, we're not here to teach you all of Unix because that's a college course in and of itself. And we're not going to get into a debate as what's better between Emacs, Nano, or Vim because we all know that Nano is better. So we're going to do we're going to go over kind of a brief history of Unix just to kind of give you some background and some of the reasons why it's such a nice, juicy area to explore.
Wow, it feels like my marriage. I get to talk now. Give me that. All right. So, yeah, a little bit of a history on Unix. Here, I'll step out of your way so people can still... actually, I might want to block the light a little bit. It's glaring off your head. So, the history of Unix starts roughly around 1945 with ENIAC. It was the first large-scale computer. There was other computers around at the time, before that, what have you, but that was the first general-purpose one. Yeah, what have you. But after that, in 1964, there was something called Multics. It was at Bell Labs, and the most prevalent thing about Multics was... There we go. Ken Thompson and Dennis Ritchie was working there, and they were working on Multics, and they decided to get a little side project going, and they worked on something called Ultix, or Unix, or Unic, depending on which version of history you read. Ultimately, they decided on the term Unix for it, just for, I don't know why, don't remember that aspect of it, but it started out as Unic, or Unix, or bunch of different versions of it, ended up with Unix. And it was written in assembly at the time. In 1971, it was actually written in assembly on a PDP-11. I have to ask, other than myself, who in here has ever worked on a PDP-11? Anyone? Does anybody know what a PDP-11 is? Okay, I'll give you that one. Okay. So, sometime later... Dennis Ritchie and Kernighan, they decided that they wanted to write this new programming language that makes it easier for people to do stuff. So they wrote C. And now that there's this nice new language called C, clicker's annoying me. Sorry about that. They rewrote Unix and C. From there, everything started changing. I'm going to have to switch clickers. BSD was written and released 1978, still going a little slow. And then finally, 1982, I don't know, what is that, 15 years or 14 years later there, the first version of Unix was released outside of Bell Labs to the general populace. It was AT&T Unix System Group released System 3. Personally, I never used that one. But 1982 is when everything started really changing with the release of Sonos 1.0, HPUX, and Ultrix 11. I don't know if I used Ultrix 11, but old versions of HPUX and Sonos 1 I definitely did. All of which were the basis of corporate Unix environments at that point. Soon after became AIX, bane of my existence for many years. Then IRIX, which was really cool for graphics, but I don't remember much of it other than that, honestly. Then finally Solaris came around, which would have been, Sonos 5.0, I believe it was Solaris 1.0, and most notably, Linus started working on what became Linux at that time. Soon after, you had Digital Unix, True 64, and 2001, what is now considered Mac. Mac OS was around well before that, but then it became OS X 10, and just that's the thing is, Unix has been around for way many more years than Windows has a lot more variety to it, a lot more stuff. That was very, very short overview of it. We're going to give you a quick little view of the family tree of what is current day Unix here. So let it get started here. It just takes about 45 seconds. And wow, that is not working.
No, that didn't work at all.
No.
So, here, let me see.
Yeah.
So
while I'm doing this.
the whole point of showing like the family tree and some of the history is all of these systems were eventually stapled together throughout all the years. You see it just keeps continuing growing and growing and growing. Those are all Unix systems, okay? Yeah. And with all of those systems, obviously comes more bugs, more vulnerabilities. People say the old way of doing things as they come up with this new version, so they just carry on the old way of doing things. And as we all know, the old way of doing things doesn't necessarily work. So as it continues to grow, we're up to 2011, and you see it just gets, even more wild.
This is just a quick view through it here.
And then at the end, it didn't do it.
Zoom out.
Yeah, it should zoom out. Yeah, there you go. Those are all Unix systems. So that gives you an idea of just what you're dealing with when you see, a Unix system out in the wild. You're dealing with, 50 plus years of history, essentially, right?
So yeah, sorry about the video there, but now, as David was saying, Unix is rather complex. It's a lot more target space to look at. Each iteration of it, each version of it has its own slight nuances, how they want to store files, where they want to store files. But at the base of it, there is a lot of commonality still among it, so among the different versions. Oh. Stop. There. I'll just click it there. So, some of the things that historically have been known as issues or have caused issues in various Unix flavors and Linux flavors have been, there's a wide variety of them, but I'm going to very, very poorly and generally categorize them as 4 different types here. Password-based vulnerabilities, file permissions, trust relationships, and a very general term of application flaws, which includes buffer overflows, remote code execution, heap overflow, things of that nature. Go ahead and click it if you want. Other way. There. Oh, no history of Unix and Unix flaws can be discussed completely without touching on Morris. 1988, he was from Cornell. He he helped identify several different vulnerabilities, or at least he made use of several different vulnerabilities that were already identified at the time in SendMail, Finger, RSH, common weak passwords, stuff like that. He wrote them all together in a nice little package. It would try to get onto a system through any number of vulnerabilities, including remote code execution via SendMail and Finger. It would use RSH for trust relationships to try to migrate to other systems. It would try to crack the local passwords, use that to expand over to other systems as well, because people at the time and even today use weak passwords and common passwords, root blank, stuff like that. And he was trying to be really sneaky here, among other things, as it says he was at Cornell, but he released it at MIT, just so people couldn't trace him. But he kind of signed everything, and so they traced him anyway. And but yeah, that's still it. That's just Morris Worm. There's whole documentaries written about it and all that. Just wanted to give you a quick overview of that's one of the most prominent early public exploits of Unix systems out there that most people are going to recognize. So go ahead. So going down through the list, one of the first things I want to talk about is passwords. quick overview of it. Etc password is where most Unix systems and Unix-like systems store their passwords. It started out many years ago. It was username, password, encrypted password that is, UID, GID, full name, basically all the information about a standard user. That worked well for a very long time until people started realizing, oh, that's just using DES to encrypt it early on, or later on triple DES and various other things. But, okay, that's fine, it's still encrypted, but everybody on the system has access to that file, so they can read it. And that means everybody has access to the encrypted passwords, which is generally a bad idea because people are going to start cracking them. With the advent of stuff like John the Ripper and other password cracking tools, people started cracking these. So most operating systems out there at the time, and now all of them I believe have now, moved the encrypted password over to Etsy Shadow or over to Etsy security passwords, depending on what OS version, like HPUX, I know has moved it out into other file systems and all that, but regardless, they've taken the encrypted password out of there and moved it out into separate files, makes it a lot harder that only members of the wheel group or root group can access that file. Okay, so they've locked that down, and they've also upgraded it from from DES to MD5 to SHA-1, so forth, to make it harder to crack. Yeah, it's still possible, but next one down the line, file permissions. We'll touch back on this a little bit later on a set UID vulnerability, but Unix file permissions are fairly granular on their base without getting into more row-based access and all that, or Macs and DACs and all that. But you have it broken down into it's a owner, a group, or other as to how access is broken down. The owner has read, write, or execute permissions on a file. Members of the same group can have read, write, or execute, or anybody on the file system or on the system can have read, write, or execute. That's fine. You can lock it down pretty well as to who wants to have access. But the main thing that we're going to be talking about is down here at the bottom, the set UID and set GID bits. Those are represented with S's and either the owner or group execute flags there. But the main thing about that is it says that whenever you run, say it's a binary, and you run this binary as some standard user, you're actually not running it as you at that point. You're running it as privilege of whoever the owner is or who the group is, corresponding if it's set UID or set GID. It changes your user identity or your group identity while it's executing it. Sort of a run as command that's hard-coded into the file system for that particular file. That comes in handy. I mean, you'll see that on a lot of stuff like the password command, stuff like that. When you want to change your password, it has to elevate privilege and stuff like that. But people have historically written packages and scripts that make use of that, and that's where a lot of flaws historically have come from as well. I remember back in the day, government systems had a particular package that came with them, and in there was a set UID script that allowed you to basically run any command. Why it was on there, no idea. They thought it was a good idea, and they didn't think anybody would ever make use of it, but it was a huge flaw, and then there's other things going on. Interesting kind of files you want to look at if you're on a Unix system. Like Etsy password, Etsy Shadow if you can get it, or Etsy Shadow.back, or /temp, anything in there. Your var log directory, any dot file. Like if you go to somebody's home directory and you do ls-la and you see a bunch of files that start with dot, any directories or files that start with dots tend to have some useful information in there. Maybe, maybe not. But if there's a history file or if there's a bash RC file or something like that, you might be able to see hard-coded commands they have in there, history of commands they run. You might grab passwords or associated systems. You might have stuff like .forward files that allow you to have access to other systems, or .rhost, .shost, stuff like that. So yeah, and then of course, if you want to search for a set UID and set GID, there's simple little find commands for that as well. More on some of the interesting files that I have actually still been making use of to this day on engagements are commands. It's amazing at how many Unix systems are still out there that still have R commands enabled on them. And on top of that, it's amazing. It's a very small number, but it's still amazing at the number to me that those that still use rhost files and stuff like that. I've encountered them probably about once or twice a year. I shouldn't be encountering them at all at this point, but I still am. What it does is, an rhost file says that remote user on that host has access to log in as this user without a password. Sort of like if you do SSH key, stuff like that, but it's on our host level and it's unencrypted. And there's a nice little feature that if you put a ++ in your .rhost files, that means anybody on any system can log in. A lot of developers used to do that just so that they didn't know which system they're coming from. Makes it just easier. So if you know all the Unix system names, you can just start blasting that out there and hopefully get in on one of them. NFS, a lot of times people will export out file systems like Windows shares. You have the same thing on Unix. You can find those with showmount-e space. Then the target IP will tell you what shares they export out and to whom and what privileges many times. We'll have a little video on that in a minute, or demo on that in a minute with some common exploit, or a particular exploit that people used to do with that. Set UID, set GID, or not set UID, sudo, su, do sudo -l. That will tell you all the commands your current user can execute with sudo command, with sudo privileges. Some things in there are fine. Some of them are not because they have local code execution in them. Stuff like that allow you to execute as privileged user and gain a remote shell. Go ahead. So here's a little quick demo on some of the R commands. Let's see if that one works right. Hey, it is. So this takes about a minute to go through-ish. So we're going to go ahead and do Nmap on a remote system here. Yeah, it ran down there. We see RPC bind is running. We see rexec, our login, our shell. NFS, all of those are part of RPC. So let's go ahead and do RPC info on the remote system, if I can type it. Yeah, it's a little slow. So that's another way to see all the RPC level commands that are out there. See ruser, rstatd, mountd, all of that. These are some of the common things. If you had an old Unix system, you ran RPC against RPC bind, info against it, you'll see that. Rusers is a good one. It will tell you some of the users that are actually on the system that is making use of RPC at the time. So you have MSF admin on there, a root and user. This happens to be going up against a Metasploitable VM I happen to have. So you can do rsh-l root, and as you can see, I got in. One command. Why is that? We do, looking at our host file, there's a ++ in there. That's as easy as it is if they happen to have that in there. Some other scenarios you'll come across, they'll have a plus and then a host name. That means that any user on that host name can log in. Or there'll be a username and then a plus, which means that that user from any host can log in. Most typically, they would have put in a ++, which means anybody from anywhere. It was just easier. So I think that was that one. Now, NFS. Oh, this was a fun one. There was when you share out a share on NFS, it provided out access to the world if you don't restrict it. Now, when people go to mount it, it mounts it with whatever privilege you have on your local system. It tries to. Well, if you happen to have root privilege on your local system, you mount a remote system, you have root privilege on that share. Historically. So now we do show mount, we'll see it. The thing is, there's a new, I don't know, it was early 2000s, there was a feature called a root squash that came around, and it's enabled by default now on all modern systems. So currently we are root, we see they're exporting slash to everybody. Yes, that is in the real world. I've seen that on the internet. That's bad. Don't do that. So we went ahead and mounted it. We jump in there. But what root squash does is it prevents what I'm getting ready to do right here. So I cd into the root directory. I shouldn't have access to a remote system's root home directory. And I'm just going to echo something into their home file, into a file in their home directory there. And if I do an ls now, or cat it, and it worked. That meant I was able to write something into a protected folder on the remote system because of that. Yeah, that's fine. The reason that was is because they did not have root squash enabled on there. If they had root squash enabled, that means that you can mount it as whatever user you want. That's fine, unless it's root. Then it knocks you down to a guest user privilege, so you can't do exactly that. Now, if I happen to have the same privilege level as one of the standard users on there, and I mounted it as that, the same user ID and all that, then it would have been a little different. I would have been able to write in their home directory, but that's about it. But make sure you have root squash enabled. We I think we might talk about that again in a minute. I don't know. But, okay, that's all of that. Now, services. Some of the standard services that are out there that people have went to attack over time. Telnet-D, great video on that here in a moment. One of my favorite exploits of all time back in my Unix days. Sadmin-D, if any old Solaris admins in here know exactly what that is. That had horrible, horrible remote code execution in it for many, many years. Every time they'd try to fix it, they would just come up with another one. SynMail actually had many exploits in it as well. Code execution, stuff like that. Actually, Morrisworm took advantage of that. Nmap itself had remote code execution and a root exploit in it as well for many years. If you did not follow the advice of Fyodor, you would set it up incorrectly, and thus bad things could happen. Various other web apps over time, Jenkins, JBoss, Tomcat, all that is on Unix. Yeah. So let's go ahead and take a look at my favorite exploit of all time. This was on, I forget which versions of Solaris. I think it was Solaris 9, maybe early 10. But, so take a look over here at, particular system. It's running Solaris 9. It has Telnet on it. So what we're going to do is we're going to Telnet to it. We're going to tell it, set a special flag here of -f root and specify the IP. And we hit enter, and I'm on the system. There was a nice little overflow in the -l flag on Telnet-D on how it processed it. It would say, oh, you want to authenticate. That's great. Oh, but you specified this with -f root. That means that you want to log in as root without providing a password. Fine. Well, actually, in that case, root didn't work, but bin did. Let me rephrase that. Bin worked absolutely fine. The reason for that is, if we look in here, root was actually disabled from logging in. It can only log in on console. So that's the prevention for root. But bin could log in absolutely no fine. No problem with -f bin. And if you're logged in as bin, you're just a step away from being root. Super easy to gain access to there because of all the privileges that the bin user has. But yeah, it's just one of those. And I think somebody might have seen that exploit in the wild here not too long ago.
Yeah. So actually, it's funny you mentioned that because this actually was just seen probably 2 or 3 months ago in the wild again, in a real world pen test. So, again, going back to, lazy sysadmins, misconfigurations on files, things like that, you see this sort of stuff more often. It got really quiet all of a sudden. That's eerie. I know. So we've seen a little bit of the history. We've seen a little bit of the underlying issues that come with Unix systems. So let's talk about some real world privilege escalation. We've got all this information now. What can we do with it? Some of the more modern, stuff that we can do, on a regular pen test, right? So I have a small favor to ask of you all. As we go through these slides, every now and then you'll hear me say, so we got a shell. If you hear me say that, if you guys don't mind, just yell out turtle power. That would be awesome. Okay. So we land on a system. The first thing we need to do is get a lay of the land, right? As soon as you get on a system and you're not a privileged user, you're not root, then you need to figure out, what you're looking at. You need to figure out things like who am I, who else is logged in, who are the super users, who's got, privilege access, what info can you access, what can you see, and where can you go. Some of the commands you can use as soon as you land on a system are things like uname-a that gives you your current kernel version, your environment, pwd tells you the current directory you've landed on. History is a good one because I could tell you sometimes the bash history of the user that was logged in. You can also cat the hidden file .bash history. Sudo L, like he was saying earlier, tells you commands you can run as sudo. And then you can cat users out of the sudoers and etc password to get you, if nothing else, at least get you a user list. So you've got some usernames for things like brute forcing and things later. With all of those, there comes scripting, because we all like to make our jobs a little bit easier. There are several scripts out in the wild that can do a lot of the, lay of the land for you. Linenum is a great one. Lin Priv Checker and Unix Priv Check, they all kind of do the same thing. They execute a bunch of commands. They give you a lay of the land, and they put it out in a nice format so that you can kind of get a better idea of, the system that you're looking at. Now, as with anything, when you download these, you're touching something to disk. So if they have any sort of detection or something, they're probably going to see this. But, you know, be that as it may.
But also, none of those particular commands or those tools are doing anything you can't do yourself. It's just basically shell or bash scripting around standard Unix commands that you have access to.
Right. So this is just a quick demo to show, you know, one of the tools that I like. Me personally, I like Linux. So that's really tiny. You can't see that at all. Wow. Okay. So we're on a system, and what I'm showing there is that I'm not root. I'm just a regular, you know, just a regular low previews. As pen testers, we like to work and stay clean in our work. So I've CD'd to dev SHM, which dumps the contents as soon as you reboot the system. So you can work in there safely without leaving something on disk. I've got a Python server set up on the back end that's hosting my Linux script. So back on the victim's machine, what I'm doing is I'm, you know, calling out to my Python server and saying, hey, download this Linux script. And now it's saying that it's downloaded there. Checking it to make sure that it actually got in there, and then running it so that I can see, you know, what am I looking at? What's up with the system? And because this video is super long, we're going to fast forward a little bit. But yeah, as you see all this stuff scrolling by there, it tells you everything. It gives you lay of the land. It gives you, you know, kernel version. It gives you software versions of software that's installed. Users, it gives you a nice little user list. It gives you your current permissions. Let's see. You can also do thorough tests, which gives you even more information, but then, you know, you can get, you know, kind of information overload there. It gives you, you know, the host names, so you get host name conventions. Like I said, the current kernel version. It'll dump the contents of etc passwd. It'll tell you who's got, you know, escalated privileges, things like that. And on, and even more information. So you can dump that to a text file and take it offline for taking a look, so that way you can kind of take a look and see what you're looking at. So we're on the system. We kind of figured out, you know, kernel versions, things like that, you know, gotten a better lay of the land. So oftentimes the next thing you can do is if you've got an older kernel version, you can do something like searchploit. And what searchploit is it's basically a copy of the exploit database that's on Kali Linux. You can also pull this database onto, you know, any of your local systems. And what that does is that lets you do offline searches for any sort of exploit, right? So you can see if there's a demo for it. There's not. Okay. So you can type in things like, you know, searchploit dirty, right? And then it'll show you all the different exploits that have the word dirty in them. So like dirty cow, dirty sock, things like that. And then that can kind of, you know, give you a better idea of different things to look for. So if you have an older kernel version, you can do searchploit, you know, Unix 1.0, and it'll give you all the different exploits that people have written over the years that are in that database for that current kernel version. Another one of the things to run is, so one of the exploits is set UID, which is the set owner user ID upon execution. And it's essentially just a misconfigured file permission, right?
No, camera's that way.
Oh, camera's that way, yeah. It's essentially misconfiguration setup for file permissions, right? So, we got a shell. Woo! All right. Let me hit play on it. So we got a shell in a box. And just like any good pen tester, we got to figure out who we are. We go, oh, I'm just a low privilege user, whatever. Taking a look at the server version, things like that. Okay, you know, we're 2.6.2.4, so kind of an older version. All right, let's see if they got set user ID set on any files, right? So you run this command, this find /-perm 400ls, and that'll tell you everything that has that set UID bit set. And we look, we got all sorts of options here. So scrolling down, you know, we've got, let's see, Nmap, boom, perfect, right there. There was a version of Nmap, early versions of Nmap that were released that were included in a lot of Linux versions, was vulnerable to essentially code execution. So, yep, we're going to dev SHM. we're going to write so NSE is the Nmap scripting engine. So we're writing a very simple script for, yeah, this is a hard way essentially, but we're writing a very simple script to tell Nmap, hey, use this script, and we're saving it to disk. I forgot you did the hard way first.
Yeah.
So there's our little, whoops, well,
You
crap.
clicked.
I clicked. I hate this clicker. All right, so there's our little shell that we made. We're telling Nmap to run that new NSE that we made, again, in dev SHM because we like to stay clean. And then we see that our prompt change, we check to see who we are, and we are essentially root. Because of one simple little, script that we wrote, with the NSE engine, we were able to get root in one command.
Well, let's try it a different way.
So a little bit different way and a little bit easier way. Is it going to play?
Yeah, it's playing.
We must have been clicking a lot there. Okay, so another way to do it is Nmap interactive mode. Back in the day, you could set it in interactive mode and then type in bash and immediately jump to root. Because of the way that Nmap was set up just back then, you could literally just enter interactive mode, type in 3 letters, and jump immediately to root from whatever user you were.
Even way back then when this was a possibility, in the documentation to Nmap, Fedor actually had said, do not install this and run this as root. Make sure it's installed as a different user, a lower privileged user. But none of the Linux distros that had it, and very few of the people who would actually download and install it, would do that, follow that instructions, and they would just install it as root. So this became an issue. And later on, I think Nmap now actually checks to see if it's being run as, if it's owned by root, and then prevents this capability from happening. So,
as with any good coding, he put in protections to try to keep us from being dumb. So. Some of the more common privilege escalation exploits that we've seen out in the wild. Mempo Dipper, Dirty Cow, Send Page, and Dirty Sock. And we're going to kind of show you all of them. We'll show you 2 of them. So Dirty Cow, super popular, kind of plug and play, point and shoot exploit. Came out in 2016, and it's still seen even to this day. It took advantage of, just a bad Linux kernel coding. There's all the different versions that were vulnerable to it. And because a lot of people don't like to update their systems, you still see these out in the wild. Ubuntu 16.04 is absolutely still one of the most prevalent versions of Ubuntu you see out there. And that kernel version is vulnerable to this. So we've got a shell. Woo! And we see that we are not a privileged user. We are just this user hype, We're not root. We're just some schmuck or whatever. So we do our, basic enumeration. See, oh, hey, there's an old version of there's an old kernel version on there. So let's see what happens. Double checking, and we see that it is Ubuntu 12.04, so super old. So looking back at that previous slide, you saw the version. We have that kind of set up as a cheat sheet. We go, okay, so this is definitely a version. Definitely a version. So again, we use our search exploit tool. We search for dirty. We see that there's a nice little .c file there. So we're going to copy that exploit locally to our machine. And then we set up our the simple HTTP server, which is our backend web server, so that way we can host this file. Switch back to the target here, and we copy the. Oh, you're curling it? Okay, okay. So you're curling it on there. So you're essentially copying the file locally to disk. So it's set up, it's served, there. We make sure we've got the right file. And we've got it now on disk. Again, this is probably going to alert, several people and wake several people up because you're writing a disk. But there it is. The cool thing about a lot of these exploits is they will have compiling instructions built in. So you can literally just check it. You can see the compiling instructions, copy and paste them. And then you see you've got a nice, ready to go executable there. You run it, it backs up etc passwd, makes a temporary backup so you don't accidentally overwrite your client's data and screw something up. And you provide it with your own password. And then it gives you, and unfortunately, because with, exploit developers, some of them have a sense of humor, so he, overwrites the root user as firefart. I didn't come up with that. That's the guy that wrote that. So he overwrites it as firefart. It's been compiled, it's been run, he overwrites it. You give it a few seconds for it to do the thing, and then you could say you can log in with username firefart and the password 12345. So we
just look at the file.
Double check the file to see that it's been overwritten. We see that firefart is the primary root user there. We now have the password to the root user, which was 12345. So we SU as this new root user, type it in, and boom, we are now root. So in a matter of 3 minutes, couple commands, 2 or 3 steps, we've gone from a no privilege user with very little access to now root and have full access on the machine. Another one that we've seen that just came out this year is called Dirty Sock. I don't know what what exploit developers have with Dirty and Unix, but what have you. So this was another privest that came out just a few months ago, and it affected old versions of snapd. And it's essentially another kind of like Dirty Cow. It's a plug and play, point and shoot exploit. You download it and you run it, and if your version of snapd that's installed is is this older version, you can escalate straight to root. The great thing I do want to say is that snapd developers, as soon as the developers of Dirty Sock went to them and said, "Hey, this is vulnerable," they immediately started working on a new release and had a new release out almost immediately. So within a matter of days, I think. So this is Dirty Sock. So again, we've got a shell. Woo! We're just a nobody. We're just this flourish user. We're not root. We don't really have access to anything. So we're doing basic enumeration here. See what we're looking at. It's Linux curling. It's a version. We check the snap version, and we see that it's an older snap version. Again, looking back at our notes, we see, oh man, the snap version's kind of old. So you go looking for the, again, exploit database. You see that there is a good Dirty Sock version for this version of Snap. It's local privilege escalation. That's perfect. That's exactly what we need. Go ahead. So it's already been downloaded. It's got the instructions on how to run it, what it is, kind of what it's doing. So set up our web server. Get back on our victim here. Work in dev SHM because, again, we like to stay clean. We don't like to leave artifacts behind, for other bad guys to find. Download the, Python script that we have saved on our web server there, on our temporary web server. Nice and downloaded. And then we just run it. No compiling because it's Python script. Nothing needed. You just run it. He's got a nice little graphic there. Tells you exactly what's going on. Checks for the snapd version, connects to it, sleeps so that you don't lock out or screw up anything on the back end. Sleeps some more.
Takes a few iterations.
And it rotates a few times, and then it says here you can now SU to the following account and use sudo with the password dirty sock. So you go, okay, well, let's try it and see if it actually worked. So we SU as Dirty Sock with the password of Dirty Sock. And before we were the Flourish user. And now
we're Dirty Sock. It's in the line.
Yeah, now we're Dirty Sock. Whoops. What happened?
No, it was fine. You just moved it. Go out. There. Here, let me jump to the end. Oh, you got it?
Yeah.
A little farther.
Yeah, okay, so now we can SU to Dirty Sock with Dirty Sock. All right. Sorry, starting over. And now we're the Dirty Sock user there.
Yep.
And we can sudo bash with that Dirty Sock password. And because bash is owned by root, we're now root. So, again, 3 steps, download the Python script, run it, and we're now root. And now we have full access to this machine and everything we want on it, and it's all ours. And a lot of pen testers will see Unix machines, during a pen test, and they'll go, I don't know, it's not a Windows machine, there may not be any goodies on it. But there is a plethora of goodies that can be had on that machine. I mean, developers store all sorts of stuff on there. Huh?
I said that's a nice word.
Oh, well, thank you. So, final thoughts, right? Got Milk wrote this blog back in 2011 about privilege escalation, and he kind of, went over a lot of these topics. And he's kind of the godfather and the grandfather of Unix privilege escalation. So if you want to read up and kind of want to read how all this started, absolutely go check out his blog. A lot of his research is what came out of all of these tools and all of these different things that we see, just because of some of the stuff that he wrote. We always like to give shout out to other folks that also talked about this. Jake Williams did a BSides Augustus talk a few years ago about it. And then Trade Security Weekly also did a YouTube video on different privilege escalation techniques. For yourself or at home, if you want to try this, if you want to practice, if you want to get better and do Linux privilege escalation, there's several resources out there. You've got Hack the Box. You have to hack your way in, but it's not terribly difficult. And then it's got a full line of different virtual machines that you can practice against. You can reset them and different things like that. It's totally free, if you don't mind fighting with other users for space, or you can pay $20 a month or whatever, for your own private little, section of the world there. There's VulnHub. There's, 1,000 different vulnerable machines on VulnHub for you to try out and test out. And you can get on VulnHub's website and do a search for, privilege escalation. It'll tell you good machines to practice on that, or Unix or things like that. As well as Metasploitable. That's a project that's been ongoing for several years. I think they're on Metasploitable 3 now. It's an intentionally vulnerable machine with 100 different vulnerabilities for you to try, several of them being privilege escalation. So that's it for us. There's our contact information. We appreciate you guys coming by and listen to hear us yabber for for a few minutes. Does anybody have any questions? Tyler's got a question.
Yeah. So a long time ago when I did Unix administration, NIS was used a lot for configuration file sharing.
Sure.
Do you see NIS used anymore, or what was the replacement?
NIS, you're saying? Yeah, you had NIS, NIS Plus, Yellow Pages, you had a bunch of that. I rarely, if ever, see that actually on systems anymore. Nowadays, I'm seeing more integration with AD, with Samba, with things of that nature. The last time I saw NIS, NIS Plus, Yellow Pages, all that in use, it was entirely a Unix shop where they did not have a Windows component. Most places now will have their majority of their network being Windows, and they'll have the AD set up, they'll have all that for user authentication. Then when they add Unix systems, they'll just tie into that nowadays. So, yeah. Anyone else?
Any questions? Nope.
Nope.
Comments, concerns? You want to throw tomatoes at us? All right.
Want to throw money at us?
Thanks so much for coming out.
Thank you very much. Have a great day.